Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this debate. Now, in the closing decades of the last century, many were critical of American global dominance. But 20 years on, America's relative decline has ushered in a new multipolar era that many contend is profoundly more dangerous. We have an unpredictable conflict in Europe, larger than anything since World War II, and international tension greater than at any point since the height of the Cold War. Meanwhile, from the Middle East to the South China Sea, a host of regional conflicts have the potential to spiral out of control, and the New World Order looks increasingly precarious. Can we navigate to safety through international cooperation and treaties? Do we need to align power blocks to provide overall defence? Or is it safer to remain independent, providing less of a threat to others? Or is the only solution for one nation or alliance to once again become globally dominant? So on to our speakers on all this. Christina Lamb, OBE, is the Chief Foreign Correspondent for The Times and Sunday Times, best-selling author and honorary fellow of University College, Oxford. Armen Sarkissian is the former president of Armenia, a physicist, investor, businessman, and computer scientist. And Bronwyn Maddox, the director and chief executive of Chatham House. Before joining Chatham House, Bronwyn was director of the Institute for Government, and she served as the chief foreign commentator, foreign editor, and US editor at The Times. Welcome all. Let's dive straight in, as we always do with these debates, with the key question and get 3 minutes from each of the guests just to kick it off. They get a sense of what they think are the parameters, really, of what we're talking about. In an increasingly precarious, multipolar world, how can we navigate the path to peace? I'm going to put that to Christina first.
Thanks, Roger. Easy question for a Sunday morning. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit about what I do and what I see on the ground, and then maybe can broaden it out from there. I've been a war correspondent for 36 years. And when I started in the late 80s, the Berlin Wall was just coming down. Apartheid was just ending in South Africa. There were lots of protest movements kicking out dictatorships in Latin America and the Philippines. Eastern Europe was becoming democratic. Everything felt like it was going in the right direction. Now it's obviously a very different world, as we were just hearing. I never imagined as a journalist that I would be covering a major land war in Europe. We also have a very complicated situation with Israel and Gaza, and more conflicts than at any time since the Second World War. So we have this really complicated world to navigate. We also have many people who have lost their homes, have become refugees, lots of humanitarian crises to deal with, not enough money to deal with it. So it feels a very important time to have strong international leadership, instead of which we seem to be at a time, probably the worst leadership that I can remember in my reporting life. And this situation where the US hegemony, which we had all got used to, is really coming to an end. I just came back from South Africa, actually, where they have elections this week. And it was very interesting talking to them about how they viewed this new world and being part of, I hate this expression, but the global South, and how they felt that the old colonial, post-colonial setup was really trying to just take advantage of countries like them and assume that they would just fall into line over things like Ukraine. And to them, they felt, why should they? That actually Russia and China, the new powers on the bloc, are much more relevant to them than the old colonial powers. So what I see happening is a sort of competing narrative going on. It's not just that US is declining and China is rising. You've got all these other medium-sized powers like Turkey, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico rising. But you also just have this competition going on of the old sort of colonial powers, but then countries like Russia saying what we're doing is standing up against that. And I think Gaza has really complicated things because it makes the West look very hypocritical when we're saying that we're supporting Ukraine against Russian aggression, but then we're supporting Israel going into Gaza. So that's the world as I see it. Maybe we can
we will delve into that in some detail, I'm sure. Thanks, Christina. Well, let me put the same question. Is an increasingly precarious multipolar world, how can we navigate the path to peace, to Armen?
Well, thank you very much. Happy to see all of you, as you said, Sunday morning. And I think you described the world. And I'll try to put some points. Why do I think this has happened? Why do we live in a world in 2024-25 after 35 years of the great victory and the fall of the Berlin Wall? Why we are here? So, 3 points. Point number 1, and I would title that, How to Manage a Victory. Okay? If you're Manchester City, you want the Premier League. You know that next month or two, the new phase will start, and you have to fight from scratch. Okay? In fact, they were taught a lesson yesterday. Manchester United won the cup. So that's a lesson of a life. But when you are the only superpower in the world and you have won against the evil empire, Soviet Union, and capitalism and democracy were glorious, what's next? Is there another Manchester United or Arsenal? No. You look at you think that you are the victorious, everything is clear. Capitalism has definitely won against communism, and basically it's a glorious victory of democracy. So the conclusion is, okay, we don't have to do anything. This is the end of the history. Mr. Fukuyama, Professor Fukuyama, wrote a book about the end of the history without recognizing or understanding that, in fact, this is the beginning of the history, not the end of the history, the beginning of the new world. And basically, allowing yourself to be relaxed, not to do much, and so you think that if you just push the idea of capitalism, make Russia a capitalist state, tomorrow they will become democratic, the new states, or the Russia and other states. Or let's help China to become capitalist, and the capitalist China will become a democracy, and there will be no threat to us. Do you call it new liberalism, new conservatism, or new dreaming? I don't know. The West created China by investing huge amounts, not only in money, effort, construction, structure, but also know-how. There was no China 35 years ago. What was wrong? China staying communist. And the belief that the communist China becoming capitalist will become a democracy didn't work. And believing that communist Soviet Union or the Republic of Russia will become democratic fully the moment it became capitalism. There are many types of capitalism, oligarchic, state-owned, many. So Russia, or the former states, including my own state, Armenia, became capitalist, and it not necessarily brought democracy. In many places, democracy was a pretend democracy. That's point number 1. Do you want me to say point number 2 later?
Very briefly, but we are coming on to all those in detail. Actually, I mean, let's leave it there, because there's a lot to get into, and you've said
Pleasure.
A great
You are the boss.
I am. Well, we shall see.
This is the new world order.
Bring you in just so we have equal time on the first point.
We still have that bit of the rules-based order.
We try. Multipolar. In an increasingly precarious multipolar world, how can we navigate the path to peace?
It's great to be here. We are in a very different world, as Christina described. Much, much more complex. That is partly because of America's retreat, as she described, though not complete retreat. I think we should look at the part of the picture of this is the complexity of what's going on in America. Yes, it went into 2 wars which did not go to plan, that's an understatement, and struggled through the financial crisis of 2008 and lost a lot of support around the world for that. But at the same time, it has backed the creation of the internet and then AI, all kinds of technology that is reshaping the world for everyone at the same time. But out of its own complexities, it is also choosing to retreat. And now we find ourselves tugging at the US, regardless of what president is there, saying, but please don't forget about the defense of Europe. So it's a complex picture there, but it is one that has left the world and the order in the world very much open, up for grabs. And there are all kinds of countries which look at one bloc that is forming as China asserts its support for Russia, and indeed Iran on one side, and they look at the US, where they say, look, we don't think you've handled the past decades very well. And they say, why should we follow the rules that the US led the world to support after the Second World War? We weren't round the table when you were making those rules. You made them in your own interest, and you don't even follow them all the time. And it's time for us now to look around and shop, if you like, for allies of choice. And you've got lots and lots of countries doing exactly that, saying, why should we be bound by the alliances of the past or being told what to do? Now, I think if we want something of a rules-based order to continue, then, and if we want some of the values of the West to continue, individual liberty, human rights, and so on, then we have to, again, make the case for those rules. And part of that is to show that the West will uphold those rules itself. And that is why this debate about double standards, which is an old debate going back decades, but why it is so highly charged at the moment. But I think it is still there to play for, that we can make the case for, if you like, Western values, but we have to show that the West will abide by those, even while acknowledging that China and others are full of hypocrisy themselves, but say that we are going to adhere to those rules more than in the past and draw in more country voices into making new rules in the future.
Bronwyn, thank you. Well, let's pick up on that, and as we do in these debates, divide the whole thing into several parts and play off that. And let's start then with, is a multipolar world inherently unstable? Does global peace require an uncontested great power? Now, Christina, when you were talking, I was thinking about that period, and when Bronwyn was mentioning it too, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when there seemed to be an uncontested space in a way, and yet, as we know, it was anything but stable. I mean, you reported on most of it. So that point about is multipolar more unstable than unipolar in that sense? So we saw what unipolar looked like, and frankly, it wasn't that stable.
I mean, unipolar is obviously simpler. Multipolar is a complicated world, and you see different people on different sides in different places. I think in the early 90s, it was still stable, and we saw democracy spreading to different places. It's really, to me, that the war in Iraq was a sort of turning point, and it's led to much more instability.
The first one or the second one?
The second one. Has led to much more kind of questioning of Western values. And as Bronwyn was saying, I mean, if we're going to advocate for this rules-based order, we have to be seen to stand by it ourselves. And I think we've seen, certainly in the United States, but in this country too, in recent years, that we can't take democracy for granted either, right? We have to fight for it. It's not just in all these other places that we're seeing autocracy spreading. It worries me that you see a lot of surveys of young people, there are some young people here today, saying that they favour stronger leadership because they feel that they're being let down by democracies. So I think that's something, I suppose what I'm saying is apart from looking at who we ally with, we have to look very carefully at our own behaviour and what we're doing in our own countries.
But often that reflects, I suppose, who we're allied with as well. I mean, when countries traditionally found, during the Cold War, the US and its allies to be their supporters, least some of them were pushed towards democracy, not wholly so.
I mean, the country that I've covered more than anywhere else in the last 30 years is Afghanistan, which obviously I'm heartbroken about what's happened. But when the Taliban moved in August 2021, that was the biggest humiliation for NATO in its history. And I personally wondered whether NATO could even really survive as an organization. And in a strange way, what happened with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine 6 months later by Russia was sort of enabled NATO to re-establish itself. And I was quite taken aback. I did not think NATO would step up to the task in the way that it did. So that actually has been a more positive lesson now. I think we should be doing a lot more if we really care about
it. May
Ukraine.
in the end be a positive or a negative, I suppose we should say. It is still...
But it did show that all of these countries could work together in a way that I thought perhaps they wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, and some of them quite small countries. Armen, let me bring you in on this, because you've written a book about the ways in which small countries can work within a modern system. And I suppose many people would feel that's what we're talking about, which countries ally with which big powers. And if there is one big power, one superpower, if you like, that they need to align with, is that easier, or is it better for them to be able to play off many different ones, as the position we seem to be in at the moment?
I'll try to answer that question, but let me also continue what was said by you, that it's worth it to fight for democracy. I think the history is nice, because if you learn the lessons of the history, and the lesson of 35 years teaches us that it was very, very much worth it to fight for real values of democracy in early 1990s, rather than just leaving countries of former Soviet Union to develop their own democracies, or leaving them to develop their own capitalism. In many places you get sort of mutants of capitalism and mutants of democracy. Then fighting for democracy, helping those countries to create a real democracy, not the e-democracy, which is electoral democracy, but the real one that is connected with checks and balances and culture of democracy, probably would have not taken us today to live in this world. So it's worth it, and we don't have any other choice rather than to fight and to prove that the values of democracy and the values that come from the West are worth it, and they are the only way forward. And to show and to fight them, it's much more expensive, because there are lost human lives and so on and so forth. Secondly, I would like to comment on what you said about the internet, new technology and so on. These are two parallel processes. There was a classical world moving ahead with the successes and the mistakes, with the victories and the failures, which is a classical world that we know, making the decisions. But parallel to that a process that started more than 100 years ago was moving a new world, which I call a quantum world. Why? Because it's basically moving itself based on the quantum physics and quantum mechanics that was discovered more than 100 years by great people. What they have discovered in order to describe reality, I mean the natural reality, you have to change your mentality. That's why then you'll create something which is called theory of relativity, or understand the elementary particle is not necessarily goes from here directly to
Armen,
here.
I'm going to have to pull you off physics just briefly and put it back onto the...
Okay.
There will be places for physics.
Okay, fine. I'm advising you to get your physics at school to your children. It's very important for the future. Now, multipolar, single polar. It's four-dimensional. United States was and is still the one polar state in military. No question, that is the most powerful country in the world. Number two dimension is the economic one. United States is still the most attractive economically place. There is China is growing, there are India and others coming. That's second dimension. Third dimension, I will say, it's important, is the media or information dimension, which is a new dimension in the world, and we leave that. That's also a hard power, like military or economics. It's also a great soft power. But there is a fourth dimension which is coming, which is definitely connected with quantum physics, artificial intelligence, and which is the smart power. How on earth you can use all of your hard smart, so soft and other powers, your oil and that, to be successful. And my book, as you remember, was about smart states like Singapore, small states, like Norway, like Denmark, like Israel, like Qatar, that are small, that have become very important and powerful. And they are now living in a new world that their smart power can challenge the big one. And there will be probably one of the possible solutions in the future that I will tell later.
Okay, Armen, thank you for that. Well, Bruno, let me come back to you on that one. I mean, Armen's saying in some ways it is still a unipolar world on many levels, but what about that, the nature of stability that comes from either unipolar or multipolar? What's your take on that?
Just say I was enjoying the physics lesson because I give a vote for physics. So I was very depressed that David Miliband recently, in a big speech, boasted of his D at physics A level, adding himself to the long list of people in British public life who say I can't do numbers. And I thought that was really depressing. So thank you. On the unipolar, multipolar, we're not in a unipolar world. China and those it chooses to deal with, I'm not going to say make alliances with, because it is a very transactional relationship, but that is forming as a block of different significance in different conflicts or areas of trade. Do we need it for stability? A unipolar world in those years when the US seemed completely dominant led to a kind of stability. We thought in times, as Christine has described, that everything was moving one way. I remember a very senior civil servant, British, saying, and not a bombastic type, saying we really thought we were bringing the message of democracy to all these countries, that history was going in that direction. We have something much more unstable now with two, but it is because the two are both reaching and exploring what their alliances want to be, and other countries looking for what is their best advantage. It is more unstable, so I would give you that, but it keeps open the option of lots of different outcomes. I mean, would we want a unipolar world that was just governed by the Chinese? To be fair, I don't think it's what China wants. It wants its own sphere of influence quite extensively around it. It wants to be able to do what it wants. I don't have any sense it wants to push the US out of the history books other than control its own space. But so, yes, we are in a much, much less stable world.
Let's move on to specifics in a way, because we've been talking in a very wide context about all this. But what about what happens with the real conflicts and challenges of the world we are in? The next part of the discussion is with unpredictable conflict in Europe and the Middle East, a rising tension in South China Sea. Should we now tighten alliances for defense or be more independent? Should we intervene or should we step back? I will come to Armen first on this, only because one or two of the things you were saying before about the nature of smaller states, and that is your background, of course. To what extent should they try and cling to one particular shirt tail, if you like? Or to what extent should they step back and be more selective in terms of their own benefit?
Well, in the old unipolar world, or two-polar world, when the world was divided between Soviet Union and United States, I agree it was a very stable world somehow, because there was a principle of détente. America was afraid of Soviet Union because it could destroy itself. America, not only America, but the whole world 10 times, and the other way around. So that was the stability that was coming. I was living in that country called Soviet Union, which is absolutely stable. You don't know what that means. When I was born and I started thinking, I already knew what I was going to do, where I'm going to end. I had some mathematical talent that I know that I will be doctor, then professor, head of big department, that academician. They'll give me a medal, a car, and then I'll die. That was it. I mean, very stable, very predictable, okay? Do we want that sort of a world? No, I was fighting a lot to become free, to have opportunities, to become from a scientist, a diplomat, prime minister, president, businessman, make money, and all of that, the beauty of this world. So I can assure you that one polar world is done. We will be guided by United States to a multipolar world. In that multipolar world, there is a big role for the small states. Why? Because as I was telling, about the fourth dimension, which is the smartness and how do you do it. The world will be ruled in many ways. Military power. Who has the biggest military power today and in 10 years' time? The one state that has 150 million like Russia population and can create an army of 1.5 million soldiers? Or the one country can create 1.5 million of drones? And one country that will have the best artificial intelligence because they will be running these drones. The second one. So a small country with the top technology can be challenging the big. That's the future which is coming.
So not in alliance particularly with any one or...
In fact, the other way around. The new structure in the future of stability, and the way I think and the way I have written and finished in my new book, which is called Quantum Politics, is that there will be a new architecture of stability, and that will be based also to the role of many other states, including the middle states, but also important, the small ones. You were speaking about conflicts. Where are they negotiating now? In Switzerland? In Paris? In New York? In London? No. In Doha. Yeah. It's a small, smart state with 360,000 people that is smartly investing the gas money or oil money into education, science, and making their presence very important. These are the smart states that will be, and in the future, the big states will be seeking the partnership with them because the future stability will be kept. Where is the only University of Artificial Intelligence in the world? Can anybody guess? It's in Abu Dhabi, in Masdar City. That's the only one. And the guy who is running that is a Chinese-American professor, Eric Zheng, fantastic person. But it's in Abu Dhabi, not in London, not in Paris. So small states will be the balance with the medium and the big ones to create the new stability of the world.
This is very reassuring. I mean, I would accept. I would certainly say that small, smart states have a lot of influence. You could, at a slightly bigger level, include Britain in that. But it doesn't take much to get the same technology into the hands of small, smart terrorist groups. It's not just about states who can negotiate with each other.
I agree.
Nothing to get drones and AI into.
I agree with you. But so that's why our challenge found not to make the same mistakes as we did 35 years, but to support those countries who are small, medium, smart, and good ones for the future. Yeah. And not allow the bad ones to take over.
Well, or the non-state actors, which I think...
Or non-state actors, please. We have the time now that we had 35 years ago. What we didn't do enough, and we have now the wars.
Yeah, let me pick something up.
That's the beginning of the history today.
All right. Eat your heart out, Fukuyama. Christina, you were talking about South Africa earlier, and I was thinking when I was listening to Armen about it's one of those states which might be described as middle, I suppose, in the sense that, and it has, well, with its, for example, pushing legal actions against Israel recently, been taking interesting lines that don't make it very clearly aligned. There are obviously historical links with Russia, to some extent with China. How do you think that plays? Is South Africa somewhere that is perhaps playing the game that Armen's talking about of selecting what works and taking advantage?
Absolutely. I mean, they feel, why should we be dictated to? And I think Ukraine was quite a lesson in a way to Western countries where I think there was an assumption that the so-called, I hate this expression, but the global South would just fall in line behind and were quite taken aback when those countries didn't support Ukraine at the UN or abstained, at least, in the votes to condemn Russia. So, I mean, I think one of the things that complicates everything now, and it's going back to what you were just talking about, we're not just in a multipolar world, but we're in a much more totally interconnected world where anybody can access these different technologies and things in different places. On the other hand, Ukraine, I think, is an interesting example because it's the weirdest war I've ever covered. If you go to the east of Ukraine, it looks like the First World War. It's all muddy trenches and, but they're also using the most sophisticated technology. It's a drone war too. So, and you're saying that it enables smaller states to stand up to big states. I don't know, because what we are seeing in Ukraine is Russia is prevailing at the moment on the battlefront, unfortunately. Why? Because it has overwhelming manpower and it doesn't really care
I'm not
about
speaking
what
today.
happens.
10 years time.
Well, I still think
There'll be no
that
soldiers, drones only.
you still need people, though.
Yeah. And the interesting
So-
point with what you're saying is that those drones you were talking about, many of them come from Iran, for
Yes.
example. Many on the Ukrainian side come from Turkey. So we're seeing the ways in which small states, of course, North Korea, of course, providing a lot of weapons too. So it is that dynamic, isn't it?
But I wanted to go back to something Armen said. I mean, you talked about growing up in Eastern Europe. The stability isn't everything. Freedom. If you have stability without freedom, that is not a place most of us, I think, would want to be. On the other hand, we saw with the interventions in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, that trying to make people free without stability is also a disaster. I mean, most people, the number of people that came up to me in Iraq and said things were better under Saddam, or in Libya things were better under Gaddafi, and you kind of think, how can people say that? It was a terrible dictatorship. But actually, when every time you go out of your house you have in danger of being blown up, you may well think that.
Yeah. Delivering democracy from 14,000 feet, as they used to
But
say.
I like the word you said, delivering democracy.
Well, yes.
By DHL or what? How do you deliver democracy?
There are better ways. Well, probably let me bring you back in on this, because I think that it is an interesting point there about the ways in which people align and with the search for freedom based on a big power that seemed to be prepared to give it. But the sense of allying with big powers as a way of achieving what you want, as a way of getting the outcome you need, you know, whether it's NATO, whether it's one of the agreements or the trade agreements, of course, in the Pacific. Is this something you think is going to happen more, or are we past that point where you join a team in a way, I suppose?
It's a really good question, and some of it may be influenced, I won't say hang on, the result of the next US presidential election. But America is almost choosing not to be leader of the team that it has chosen to lead since the Second World War, and identifying itself with a whole block of values in that process. And we don't know how far that will go, whether it is just driven by American self-absorption of the sheer task of knitting together so many very different people in its own country necessarily keeps its attention there. But it is clearly fed up in a sense. And so you get countries, I'm thinking of South Korea and Japan, saying we have no plan B other than the American alliance. What if America doesn't support us? And Donald Trump was very casual about the South Korean alliance in his first term. And South Koreans musing over whether they would then need their own nuclear weapon and putting Japan, which loathes the idea of such things, in a real predicament. So it isn't just about countries choosing to be part of the team. Is the team still holding together in any sense? You mentioned trade there, though, and we've talked mainly about conflict here, not about the economics of it. And one of the things that makes me very kind of sad and worried at the moment, well, there were quite a few, but is that globalization has brought billions of people out of poverty, not all evenly, but it has done a tremendous amount for many of the world's poorest countries and poorest people. And suddenly we're in this world where that old engine of liberalizing trade is being really cut off quite bluntly, with impact also on environmental goods. I'm thinking of the real equivocation in Europe, in this country, in the US, about whether to buy cheap Chinese electric vehicles and solar panels, even if they are at the moment some of the best and cheapest around, because of the hostility that is coming in. And I think we should, we're talking about this almost, it's not quite like a board game, and I don't mean that's but a country's choosing to join their teams and so on. But these have real, quite dramatic, immediate implications for the prosperity or otherwise of countries.
And picking up on that theme for the next part of this discussion, I suppose we could call it almost the First World War question. Will we be able to avoid a new and more serious global conflict? Will a new great power emerge? Will it pose a threat to the West? We talked about that maybe already happening. But I suppose the point that will we all, because of the teams, I take on board, it's a fairly glib way of talking about it, if the teams draw in their supporters, as happened, of course, in 1914, is that the risk that exists at the moment? Christine, I mean, you've reported on so many conflicts and seen and clearly depressed about the way the world is going at the moment in this way. And many of people have thought that the Ukraine war, potentially even the Gaza war, could begin to bring in more participants and move in that direction. Do you feel that's a real risk?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this goes down to what Bronwyn just mentioned, which is what happens in the US elections in November. And things could be very different if Trump wins and doesn't want to stand up to stand on the side of all of these countries. I mean, Ukraine, for example, I talked about how NATO has rallied, but the fact is we're absolutely dependent on American support in Ukraine. When the US did not pass for ages that $61 billion arms support, that's what's led to Russia now moving ahead and advancing in places. Europe, for all its talk about the importance of standing with Ukraine and that it affects us directly, which I believe it does, has not actually put itself on a war footing or coming up with what's needed. So we are still heavily dependent on the United States. So if they do decide that not our responsibility anymore, that makes things very different.
And it's been quite ambivalent in a way. I mean, just saying, for example, that US weapons of a certain kind cannot be used to attack targets inside Russia, or slightly more vague about that now, I think. But that kind of thing, trying in a way to step back from the potential of being dragged in, of NATO becoming part of it.
Yeah, but at the beginning, everyone was saying, oh, we can't send tanks, we can't send long-range artillery, we can't send fighter jets, and gradually people have changed.
But that's an interesting point. I mean, Armen, let me bring you in on this. What about this notion that people, that countries could, small countries, I guess, as well, be drawn into something bigger, that potentially a wider global conflict is a big risk now, whether, I suppose, as we were talking about in Ukraine, Gaza, or indeed the South China Sea?
I do believe in evolution. I don't believe in revolutions. Okay, there were two examples here, and I would like to go back to them. Do you hear me still? Yes. Okay. The one of Afghanistan, okay? Afghanistan is a huge historic lab for humanity to learn things. Empires tried to conquer Afghanistan, China, Persia, Russian Empire, Soviet Union tried it for years, killing a lot of people of their own. It's a neighbor, it's a huge empire, failed. Why on earth we went into Afghanistan to push a revolution? I do believe in revolution. I do believe in evolution. Evolution, which is rapid, but evolution. Our evolution makes revolution. Not revolution, but rapid evolution. So support people of Afghanistan to go through process of evolution, and they will do their own revolution. Now, your example of the World Trade Organization, globalization, is a fantastic example of evolutionary process. The world is much better place because of the globalization, because of connections and all of that stuff. Your point, number 3, is about small states. I think if we look carefully what is happening, the small states are not only the global south or global Gulf and everything. Everybody is much more smarter than. The more smarter they get, the more stable the world we will live. There is a conflict in Gaza. Are Arab states getting involved militarily? No. Will they be involving themselves in 1960s? Yes. Why? Because they are smarter. They have much more power, institutions, analysis, and all of that stuff. Okay? Very important point. The world is becoming smarter to be involved in conflicts where they don't see there.
Let me pick that point up with Bronwyn, if you can talk through the noise. I mean, that point about smarter states perhaps therefore not being drawn in, if we want to have, I suppose, the 1914 parallel, that they wouldn't do that now because they can see where their advantage lies. Do you think that is the reason perhaps we won't have a wider global or regional conflict?
I think there are reasons to be a bit reassured by that. I don't think the US wants a giant war. It's shown that in Ukraine. I really don't think China does. I think one of the few reasons to be optimistic in the Middle East is that Saudi Arabia and Iran don't show any signs of wanting a real conflagration there. So you have some very important, influential countries really not wanting full-out war. But you have also some destabilizing countries. Russia clearly wants to get back as much of its sphere of influence as it can. North Korea, it is impossible to predict. And then we go back. We're in this luxury almost of talking about great power conflict. But it was only a few years ago that we were talking about terrorist groups, non-state actors. We ought to be talking a lot more about what's happening in Sudan, in the unraveling of West Africa, because those are much, much harder for us to counter simply because they are not countries making that kind of calculation that you've just described.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, pull that back then. I mean, briefly, I'll come to you, Christina, but not all small countries are smart, I suppose, is the point, or are able to be.
I was talking about the groups, not so much the countries.
But the countries that can't deal...
They can't cope with those groups.
Because of the groups, perhaps. What do you take on that?
Do you hear me now? Fine. Now, I think not every small country is smart. There are a lot of them in the world. But the ones that are smart could be a good example. That's why, point number one, I'm lobbying to create an organization called S20. Because the small smart states are not represented anywhere at the United Nations or anywhere. There is G20, the big ones. The G7, even bigger. Why there is no S20? The smart states, only the smart ones, coming together, communicating, learning each other, not creating military or economic alliances, but making sure for other small states, but being smart is good because they will become a member of that club. So I'm lobbying, I'm speaking with presidents, prime minister, they all like the idea.
But who decides who's smart?
Okay.
Who decides who's smart?
It's so trivial. What is the richest country on the planet per head? What is the richest country on this planet per head, per capita? Norway, right. Because Norway is the... No, it's Norway. Liechtenstein. If you take the first 10, they're all small states. So here we are. We have the first 10 that small states that are smart. It's not a mathematical. I'm a mathematician. No. Don't worry about that. You cannot drag me into the jungle of definition. No, we don't have to define that. We have to embrace the concept of smart state because, as always, there is act of God.
Well, indeed.
The rain. So we have to be ready for that. So supporting...
Let me ring Christina. I love report she wanted to address. Now,
see,
have the opportunity.
Yes, I do.
One likes her.
Well,
Silence.
well, let's see.
Christina, I mean, what are your thoughts, first of all, then, about that idea of small states being the driver, I suppose, and perhaps in many ways a smart driver of avoiding global conflict?
I mean, I could see that they can play a role. As you said, Qatar is where everybody is going at the moment to try and negotiate. It's coming back.
Keep going.
He doesn't like what you are saying.
When I was thinking about navigating New World Order this morning, I did not think that one of the impediments would be heavy rain, but we are in Wales. I just think that those small states have a role to play, but at the end of the day, in terms of trying to bring world peace, that we still need the bigger countries, the countries with big militaries, and because we're talking about resolving conflicts. So
And in brief, just because we're coming towards the end now, do you think that a global conflict is a more global conflict is more likely, or do you think that actually we're going to continue to step back from the brink in the same way you're talking about the way the US was?
I think we're in a very precarious moment. I take what Bronwyn said, that, when Hamas attacked Israel and then Israel went into Gaza, there was a fear that there was going to become a massive Middle East conflagration. Touch wood, that hasn't happened, but I think, things could change. And there are too many sort of bad actors in different places. I think it's a really, really delicate time, and that's why I think it's really important how we as democracies act ourselves, because if we don't, if we're shown to be exhibiting double standards, as some might say we are at the moment, then how can we possibly try and persuade others to support? I just wanted to make one point that we haven't talked about at all. Half of the world's population is female. Only 15 countries in the world are actually led by women. I feel very strongly that we would have far less conflicts and more peace if women...
Well, a good point. I'm afraid we do have to end the debate there. I wish we didn't. And I'm a man saying that. What's going on? But anyway, thank you so much for being here with us. My thanks to all our panelists. Thank you very much for being here.